Hi again, my name is Celine Coggins. I'm the Executive Director of Grant Makers for Education. I can see our room is already filling up for today's session. All right, here goes with my alliteration. Today's session is called Philanthropy and Postsecondary Attainment, Promising Practices for Partnership and Impact. Really excited to be joined by a great bunch of partners led by the Kresge Foundation today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Behrens, who is here from the Johnson Center at Grand Valley State University. All right, take it away, Terry.
Okay, thanks, Celine, and welcome everybody. Delighted to have you all here. I'm Terry Behrens. I'm the Executive Director of the Dorothy A. Johnson Center for Philanthropy. We're at Grand Valley State University in Western Michigan. So we're getting our usual winter weather here. We got this. The Johnson Center is a non-degree granting unit within the university. Our mission is to understand, strengthen, and advance philanthropy. So we focus on working with both donors and nonprofit organizations to help create stronger, more inclusive communities. We offer training, professional development that's based on competency models. We do research and evaluation, and we have a lot of tools to help communities and individuals use data more effectively. One of our premier pieces of work is the foundation review. And I'm the founder, so this is my baby, founder and still the editor of the Foundation Review. We're the first peer-reviewed journal of philanthropy, and we are now in our 12th volume. So this issue, we were fortunate to have sponsored by the Kresge Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, and the Woodward Hines Education Foundation. So that makes the issue open access for everybody and helps support producing this webinar. So I want to thank our sponsors and let you know that the issue can be accessed at the URL you see on the website there. And again, this issue is free for anyone to access. We'd encourage you to take a look at the articles that are behind the presentations that you'll see today. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors. And I'm going to turn it over to Ed Smith from the Kresge Foundation, who's going to be our moderator today.
Thanks, Terry. Greetings, everyone. As Terry mentioned, my name is Edward Smith, and I'm a program officer on the Kresge Foundation's education team. I'm excited to represent my funder colleagues at the Woodward Hines and Lumina Foundations in supporting this special open access issue of the Johnson Center Foundation Review and the studies therein. I'm joined by our panelists, Shelley Strickland and Jillian Rosen from the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, Tate Kellogg from Higher Education Insight, Ann Hendrick from the Woodward Hines Education Foundation, and Heather McCamley and Eleanor Anderson from Northwestern University and the University of Pittsburgh, respectively. I'm also joined by Kimberly Hanauer from Unlocked Ed. You can read their bios on GFE's webinar page, as well as our issue page. These authors will share their learning about funders' efforts to increase post-secondary education attainment and college opportunity, and will recommend future frontiers for this work in the presentations they lead coming up. We'll jump into a few polling questions shortly, then transition to presentations of the articles, followed by breakouts in which everyone will have a chance to engage in an intimate discussion of each article. Then we'll return to the larger group for a moderated discussion with opportunities for questions at that time. While the authors present to the larger group, you can throw your questions in the chat if you'd like, but I encourage you to withhold any article-specific questions until the breakouts. I'm going to try to keep the presentations rolling with little interruption. Let me just say a little bit about why this work is important to me and important to Kresge. It's critical that funders have access to lessons learned from previous efforts and guidance on how to effectively address existing knowledge and practice needs. This aligns with our learning orientation, striving to develop a rich understanding of what came before us so that it can inform how we show up to an issue or topic that aligns with our mission. And finally, we think authors should showcase their efforts and be in direct conversation with funders who might have the agency, platform, and hopefully the will to act on it. As I said, we have some polls to get us warmed up and get us a sense of our orientation around research and evidence. Hopefully these questions foreground the experience you'll have with the presentations and the breakout discussions. Jesse, if you wouldn't mind just sharing the poll questions with the audience. So as you can see, the first one here is, how does post-secondary education literature assist in advancing your work and or your organization's strategy? So I could see that it looks like we engage in a number of these ways and look for literature to assist in several different ways, whether it's introducing interesting ideas and innovations or providing evidence and perspectives on it, interventions and promising practices. It looks like we both come to literature to introduce new ideas as well as provide evidence on their effectiveness. Second question is, how often do you consume post-secondary education research? I'm thrilled to see that no one has selected never yet. That's good. I think we should be engaging to some extent with the literature and evidence base around the questions we pursue and the topics we seek to address. Great, a few times a month. Where do you turn for post-secondary education research ideas and interventions? Great. It looks like we turn to a number of sources to get ideas and information and evidence on some of the questions we pursue or the programming needs we may have, which I think is a good thing. And thankfully, one such source here is the Foundation Reviews journal, which I think hosts a lot of sound information on philanthropy in general, but this particular issue will highlight some of the key post-secondary education attainment questions and some studies that really show some strong recaps of evidence and prior research on some of the pressing challenges we face on this topic. So why don't I turn the webinar over to Shelley and Jillian and allow them to start their presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ed, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Shelley Strickland. I'm Vice President for Philanthropy at the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, and I'm honored to present today with my foundation colleague, Jillian Rosen, who is our Vice President for Community Investment and oversees all our grant making. So I wrote the paper with my former doctoral colleague in higher education and the independent evaluator of our community scholarship program, Dr. Carmen McCallum, because of our shared research interest as academics and the Foundation Review special issue on post-secondary education attainment. Although the evaluation is still underway, we wanted to analyze the philanthropic aspects of this still evolving program at its 5-year point in 2019. So our world has changed since we wrote this paper in 2020. So Jillian, who oversees our scholarships and actually created the program design in 2014, is going to provide the more important information on our community scholarship program to date. Although I focus on philanthropic aspects in the paper, there are universal aspects of program implementation and change management that can apply across foundation types. The paper focuses on many of these highlights that you're seeing on the screen from the first 5 years of the program that I'm going to quickly run through. So as context for the next slide, although we'd been doing scholarships for years, the foundation began questioning the impact of our many one-time scholarship programs, just as there was a greater public interest around college access networks addressing college degree completion. So while the Ann Arbor area is a highly educated community, our local college access network, Washtenaw Futures, was showing a very different picture when demographic factors were assessed across our service area of Washtenaw County. So this context timed with the transition in leadership at the Community Foundation as well. So in late 2014, a new scholarship program design based on local data was presented to our Board of Trustees, and they took the bold action not to accept any new scholarships that did not fall under this new rubric. We would continue to honor existing commitments, but we would only accept new gifts for scholarships under the new Community Scholarship Program rubric. Donors do have the option to name a fund under the CSP umbrella. So the next slide shows the essence of our program, which we administer with community partners of the Washtenaw Intermediate School District, Washtenaw Community College, and Eastern Michigan University. So while serving local students who are first-generation college students, those from low-income families or students of color, are not necessarily unique aspects, the multi-year awards and the dedicated college success coach aspects of the program distinguish CSP. The college success coach is essentially a dedicated mentor who helps students to navigate higher education from matriculation to graduation. Seeing students through college and tracking their persistence and progress marked a very different approach to scholarships for the Community Foundation. We no longer wanted to just award scholarships. We wanted to encourage degree completion. So we believed, as the next slide will show, that donors would respond to CSP because it was based on data, what we're talking about today, and not just data, but impact and the opportunity to make a big measurable impact. And that proved true with the inaugural donor to the program. Anonymity was important to this program being embraced by the community, and matching funds also helped us to secure widespread support. So once this funding was promised at the end of 2015, the next slide will summarize how we very quickly moved to making the program a reality in early 2016. Our annual community meeting is our biggest and most valuable platform with hundreds of attendees. Remember back when we could gather together? So we hustled internally to be able to introduce the first cohort of students at that meeting in 2016 and to announce the matching funds from the inaugural gift. So I say hustle internally because Jillian will mention more about how we have worked together differently to make things like this happen quickly. So a year later at that same annual meeting, we announced that the match had been met and people still continue to give, and they're still giving today in monumental levels, responding to data, responding to early evaluation results. We also began an annual scholarship luncheon, and we invited our existing legacy scholarship donors to hear from a U of M professor that you see pictured about racial equity in education. So we were starting to push the envelope a little bit more. And we started seeing conversions of those existing scholarship funds that wanted to come under the CSP umbrella. And as my last slide will show, an integral component of this program's growth and success are the partnerships with two family foundations that help fund the college success coach positions and also the program evaluation I mentioned. And it's Dr. McCallum's featured on the bottom there. And when she spoke at our last luncheon we were able to gather in person, it was a resounding success for our donors and community partners to hear the impact that was being made already. So as we continue to see more gifts, fund conversions and partnerships, we also evolved the program in many ways. We now have two college success coaches who are full-time employees of record at Washtenaw Community College. The scholarship award package increased to $20,000 for each student that they can use flexibly, because we learned students were not accessing their funds equally throughout their college journey. We also learned that college scholarships were not enough for persistence. So we created an emergency needs fund. And Jillian's going to pick it up from here, beginning with how important that emergency needs fund has become during the pandemic.
Great. So now it's 2020. I'm sure you all remember 2020. And we leaned into what was working with the model in order to comprehensively support our scholars. What began as an add-on feature to the program, our Emergency Aid and Financial Assistance Fund, became and still is a critical just-in-time resource that provides direct cash assistance to students for educational and life necessities that support persistence and graduation, like health insurance, groceries, rent, medical bills, books, technology, in order to stay enrolled and learn remotely during the pandemic. Our success coaches fully wrapped around all students to support them in navigating the unknown of pandemic life. They were on the phone with them at all hours, texting, video chatting, reminding them that they weren't alone in this, and that they had resources and people who believed in them, that they could persevere even during this very difficult time. Also in 2020, we are stepping into policy discussion and advocacy efforts to reduce the negative impact of scholarship displacement, because it is a significant barrier to our students' ability to access and use all of the available monetary resources to support their educational journey. And all that being said, even with those barriers, we are very proud of our students and the program and the positive results that are showing. So our goal is to have 40% of our students persist and attain a degree within 5 years of graduating high school. And this modest increase from the status quo rate degree attainment of 30%. And it is modest, but we thought that it was going to take a lot of efforts to move the needle. As you can see from the graph on the slide, each subsequent cohort shows greater persistence towards graduation than the previous cohort, as the program evolves and is providing a better service. You'll see on the graph that our first cohort, labeled as year 5, will exceed both the status quo degree attainment and surpass our program's goal of 40% degree attainment. We're so proud of them. As Shelley mentioned, our program had its genesis in 2014, but really kicked off in 2016. And so now 5 years out, we're starting to see the outcomes. This year, we'll see 10 students from cohort 2 graduate this spring. And that means that they're graduating in 4 years, not 5 years. And this is due in large part to the hard work and determination of the student themselves, as well as the intensive support from our success coaches. In addition to providing $1.2 million in scholarship and monetary resources, the Community Foundation has also invested over $450,000 to operate the success coaching and the support network that helps students navigate educational success. So as Shelley and I wrap up, we wanted to share some implications that we've noticed in our own work and recommendations for the field in pursuing this in your own communities or iterating on similar types of programs. So first off, know your data. Without the comprehensive community level data, we would not have known how best to support young people, as well as to bring our board and current and future donors along with us in changing the odds of the outcomes. And now, as we are pursuing data, we are investing in student tracking and case management systems to dive deep into the intervention data and evolve our program to increase the number of students persisting in attaining a degree in our community. Bold action is both doing something new and stopping practices that did not serve the community and our students. And we know that saying no is often more challenging than saying yes, but to us, the outcomes are worth it. A core of our strategy has been continuous stakeholder engagement. We've been fortunate that local family foundations, the R&R Foundation and the James A. and Faith Knight Foundation, who believed in this work, co-invested so that we could catalyze the program, that we could hire our success coaches earlier than we even predicted. And they continue to be our thought partners and community champions. We also have multiple touch points each year with systems level and donor stakeholders so that they're up to speed on the program and the experience of students and that they can advocate for changes as well. We've needed to work in new ways, leaning into the opportunity to change the odds of degree attainment for Pell eligible first generation and students of color. We needed to work differently ourselves. We go to back internally and externally for our students. If they need something, we work to get them the resource. And this has been successful because internally we are all on the same page. My team, Shelley's team, our executive team, all are behind the success of these students. If what is needed is policy change, we're there for it. If it means paying for health insurance, we're there for it. If it means adding coaching staffing to right-size capacity, we're there for it. Because our job is to help these young people beat the odds and to help our community change the odds for everyone. And I know most of us probably wake up with this mantra of reminding ourselves to be flexible and adaptable, but we couldn't miss the moment to say it again. And to quote the wondrous Afrofuturist writer, Octavia Butler, and she says, all that you change changes you. And we really believe that. We have been changed because of this work. In 6 years, the program has evolved significantly, and we've been fortunate to work with terrific evaluators, as Shelley spoke about, who approach the work as a learning environment. And today's community scholarship program is still rooted in our same core that we started with, but as a result of being in relationship with students, program partners, and our stakeholders, we are constantly iterating and becoming what is needed by the community. Shelley and I look forward to diving deep into the program with those of you that join us in a breakout room later on. And for now, we'll hand it off to Tate Kellogg with Higher Ed Insight and Ann Henderson with Woodward Hines Education Foundation.
Thanks, Jillian. I'm Ann Hendrick, and I'm the director of Get to College, which is a program of the Woodward Hines Education Foundation. We had 3 other contributors for our article, Dr. Tate Kellogg, who is joining me today, and Dr. Patricia Steele, both from Higher Ed Insight, and Kirsten Dufour from Woodward Hines. 2 of the articles in the foundation review came out of the work of Woodward Hines and Get to College, and so I'll be introducing the foundation and the program for both of us today. Woodward Hines Education Foundation, we call it WEF for short, is a Mississippi foundation that helps students get to and through college. As you see on the screen, our mission is to help Mississippians obtain post-secondary credentials, college certificates, and degrees that lead to meaningful employment. Mississippi is the 45th state to have a post-secondary attainment goal. We're still really proud of that, even at 45, and WEF has been a leader in this effort. In October of 2020, the Education Achievement Council, which is made up of our K-12, our community college system, our 4-year public and private colleges and universities, approved a goal that by 2030, 55% of all working age adults will have meaningful credentials or degrees. We call this effort Ascent to 55%. And now the hard work begins, as we've got to address the tremendous disparities for low-income students, for students of color, and for our adult students. One way we pursue our mission is through our Get to College program. And our Get to College program, which is a college access program, we serve students and parents and educators. But the work of Get to College also informs the foundation's policy agenda and grant making. So our work of Get to College falls into 3 buckets. The first bucket is our direct service to our students and their families. We have 3 Get to College centers you'll see on the map in the far north. That's South Haven, Mississippi, which is right outside of Memphis. In the center is the capital, Jackson, and on the coast is Ocean Springs. These are in the largest population centers in Mississippi. We provide free one-on-one counseling on anything related to planning and paying for college. We deploy our staff from the centers to go into the high schools to do workshops for students and their parents, really assisting high school counselors. The second bucket is our big growing bucket, and where we train educators across the state. We train high school counselors, we train teachers, administrators, community members, higher ed partners. And last year we trained over 1,000 educators on anything related to planning and paying for college. The third bucket is our FAFSA completion effort. And this is what I'm going to talk about today and what our article's about. You probably know, but just in case, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It's required for any federal aid, but many colleges and universities use the FAFSA for awarding their own institutional grants. Some states, as in Mississippi, use the FAFSA for awarding their need-based grants, their state grants, and even some private foundations use the results of the FAFSA. So it's super important. At Get to College, we've long recognized the barriers imposed by the complicated financial aid system and the lack of information that many of our students in Mississippi don't get. So we know how important FAFSA completion is, especially in a state that is high poverty and a very rural state. If you don't complete a FAFSA, you probably aren't going to college. And then we encourage people to complete the FAFSA early, because meeting these early deadlines, and one deadline that's early for our state's only need-based aid, you've got to meet those early in order to have options. So for years, we provided FAFSA completion in our Get to College centers. And in 2006, we decided to go directly to the students, and we started these events called FAFSA Days in the high schools in Mississippi. These FAFSA Days are high touch, one-on-one appointments that the counselors make for us to go in and complete the FAFSA as well as our state grant application. Over time, these events really became more of counseling events, because you can see where the students are interested in attending, because you list these colleges and universities on the FAFSA. And it became an opportunity for us to really talk about college fit. We also share information about all the resources of financial aid. We talk about what happens after the FAFSA, because a lot of people get caught in the verification process and don't finish it, for that matter. So the counseling events became very important. We heard time and time again from students that this was the first time that anybody had ever talked to them about their college, about life after high school, and what their post-secondary options were going to be. So these became really important. As I said, we started in 2006. We started with 5 high schools. It grew to 26 and 78 and 126. And when we got to over 250 high schools, we knew that we had to do something. These events often ran from 9 in the morning till 6 at night. We might drive 2 or 3 hours to get there, 2 or 3 hours home, then start over the next day. So it was not something that was sustainable for our professional staff of 15. With the mutiny approaching, which is what it felt like, we really had to find a way to scale our FAFSA completion efforts. So we did. So we trained folks from all across the state, and we landed on a partnership model with our community college system. In Mississippi, the community college system grew out of agricultural high schools. And even today, all the main campuses of our 15 community colleges are in rural areas in the state. Fulton, Raymond, Moorhead, Scuba. Even if you know Mississippi, you might not know these places. And a community college in Mississippi has a very defined territory, and it ends up covering every single county in the entire state. So with our centers being in populated areas and the community colleges being in rural areas, we knew that this partnership was a really good fit. Our model is a 3-year training program where we pass off to the community college the FAFSA days that we created. And Tate's going to share with you some of the data of the success of the partnership and also what we learned from scaling a program.
Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Tate Kellogg. Delighted to be with you, although I would prefer to be with you in person, but we'll long for those days. I work with Higher Ed Insight. We're a strategic evaluation partner, I would say, with Woodward Hines. We're lucky to be, and we really enjoy that work. I personally love it. And so in that capacity with Get to College, I really led this study along with my colleagues, including Anne. So the first 2 slides here are just to show you that this was a successful partnership. We want to highlight that. Mississippi has among the highest FAFSA completion in the country. So here you just see the national average versus the Mississippi average. And that's a heavy lift because Mississippi has a very rural population, as Anne just hinted at, and also has the highest percentage of FAFSA completers that are eligible for Pell grants in the country. So a lot of need, and also students that are really spread out. And despite those challenges, again and again, year after year, Mississippi is among the top of states. That's in no small part due to Get to College's effort with these FAFSA days. And this shows in the last 3 years that those have really been taken on and owned by the partners at community colleges. So that's a great success. We're seeing in this second slide how many FAFSA days were done by Get to College staff. So Anne just mentioned briefly, they only have 15 people there, but when you look at this number, they did 262 FAFSA days in 2016, 2017, and that's when Anne hinted at the mutiny that must have happened at that time. So imagine going around a rural state with your bag in hand and helping one-on-one students and parents, appointment after appointment, really counseling around college. What are you going to go? How are you going to pay for it? And getting all those applications in. So it was a huge effort. It's still a huge effort. But what this slide is showing is that that number is going down for those Get to College, or those FAFSA days that are actually staffed by Get to College. And instead, community college staff are taking up the mantle. So what we really wrestled with, our big question when we were thinking about how this case study applies, can be extended and applies perhaps to your community, as we were thinking, how can philanthropy leverage innovative partnerships in a rural community to support post-secondary attainment? So in this case, the philanthropy is the Woodward Hines Education Foundation, and they really wanted to encourage their largest program that they support, the Get to College program, towards scaling what was a very successful model that was having great outcomes year after year. So what they decided to do, Anne and her team, was to work with the community colleges. As Anne already said, it was a really strategic partner in that community colleges are already embedded, especially in rural areas around the state. So that was how they really were able to scale up this successful endeavor. So out of the reflection of this article and putting this together, what our team has created is a tool that you all can share with your programs or anyone that you're supporting when they're thinking about scaling. And I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. It's also, of course, in, I'll do the plug here, in the Foundation Review article as well. So that tool is a list of questions to consider. And it's really important because oftentimes when we think about scaling, we're just thinking about ramping up numbers. How many students can we possibly serve in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of resources, make those resources go out further? And that may be very well intentioned, but it doesn't consider a lot of factors that we really thought about through this when it comes to depth, sustainability, ownership. There are a lot of different dimensions to scaling. So read more about that in our article. But a few questions that you can think about when you're thinking about the different dimensions of scaling are listed here. So some of the really important questions of this part is, how do you identify the right partner? So we've already talked about the success of that in this case. Are you ready to scale? How are you going to learn from scaling? How are you prepared to relinquish some control? So if you want to hear a lot about that, come to our breakout room because Anne came up with that question and wrestled with it a lot when it comes to something that's successful and passing it on for others to own. So that was a really important question for her experience. And then as the evaluator, as someone who's always thinking about data, I really liked this question. What is the least amount of data that we need to collect to measure effectiveness and impact? So oftentimes we're drowning in data. We have so much, or one or the other, right? We're not measuring anything, or we're collecting everything we can think about. And so we want to think as strategic evaluation approaches. What do we need that's not a huge lift, the bare minimum, but really that we can use every single thing that we're tracking and understand along the way. So those are just some of my favorite questions. Hopefully this is a tool that you all can use as well. And then really though, the most important question is, as organizations scale a program or an intervention, who might we exclude by scaling? And that's always, of course, central when you're thinking about equity. But for Anne, for their team at Get to College and Mississippi in particular, the sub-question here was, are we going to exclude rural students? Because really, if we just want to get numbers up, we could just concentrate our efforts on a few areas on some of these mega high schools and make sure every single student fills out that FAFSA. But in the case of Mississippi, especially, students that are physically harder to reach are going to be left behind in that endeavor. And for Mississippi, that's about half of the students in the state. So what this article really brought to light for us in this study, a whole nother topic, was the digital divide for rural students. And I feel like that's kind of humorous to say. We finished this article March 15th last year, and I think we all in education are very aware of that reality for students now, that COVID has really magnified the importance of that. But at the time, there was no existing research at all a year ago on the impact on FAFSA completion when it comes to the lack of internet access for students. So I think we're really, unfortunately, going to be seeing that this coming year, that if you don't have access to strong internet, it's impeding your ability to go over these barriers when it comes to higher education. So that's something that we kind of preliminarily discussed and explored in our article, something we're thinking about a lot when in our partnership with Get to College.
So in our article, we noted that you've got to be willing to redesign your approach to shifting circumstances. Little did we know that there was going to be a pandemic. So join us in our breakout room if you want to know what happened next for our students and for our partners.
Thank you so much. We're going to pass it over to Kimberly Hanauer.
Here we go. Hey, y'all. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. I'm going to try and match Tate's energy. Really appreciate all that she brought there. So I'm here today representing a team of practitioners, which include Stacey Sneed, who is also with the Woodward Hines Education Foundation, and Bill DeBon from NCAN. For any data lovers who love to talk about post-secondary education, if you're not following Bill DeBon on Twitter and in NCAN work, I would encourage you to jump on it today. So we're really excited to write this paper and to share it today because we take a twist on the idea of emergent learning. And instead of sharing what worked, we're going to be sharing what didn't work. And what Get to College and WEF learned that could be applicable to other organizations and foundations who are looking to scale their post-secondary work. So first, let me give you a very brief overview of the pilot program. Anne did a great overview of all of Get to College's work. And this is a repeat of an image you saw a few moments ago. So this is the map of Mississippi. And layered onto the map, you see those little blue circles. Each of them represent a high school that was a partner in the pilot program. Through the pilot, Get to College provided counselors, teachers, administrators in those communities with tools, professional guidance, and support to strengthen both student schoolwork. So we're looking to increase academic achievement, as well as taking the necessary steps to enroll in college. And so our article, which you can find on page 60, you can read more details about the pilot, and Get to College is always happy to talk in more detail about that. But what we're here today because is that Get to College partnered with the Mississippi State University Social Science Research Center to evaluate the impact of the program. And they used a multi-method approach, including student focus groups, interviews, and an in-depth analysis of the student data. And what they found was that the pilot school college enrollment rates changed very little. So 64 at the start, 64 at the end. There certainly were bright spots in the data and great work, especially in terms of students reporting increased access to college information. Unfortunately, though, the pilots didn't realize that goal of improving students' post-secondary success. And this is where I came into the picture with Unlock Ed in working with Get to College and the Woodward Hines Foundation to meet with all of the Get to College staff to understand what were the challenges that folks faced, to talk with school leaders, to meet with individual leaders, to talk with school counselors, and evaluating the pilot from start to finish. So we saw what the outcomes were, and then we wanted to say, what can we learn from this? How can we change the approach that Woodward Hines is taking in working across the state? And we had 4 major learnings, which are up on the screen now, which you can go into much more detail in the paper, and trying to be very conscientious of time here. The first piece, starting with that district and school administration, at the launch of the pilot, all the leaders signed an agreement to participate, but that didn't necessarily mean that they were engaged throughout the process. So after the principal had signed off, the primary point of contact became the school counselor. This is something we see in so many communities across the country, is you get that superintendent letter of endorsement, but that they really don't have that deep level of buy-in. And this is something we just really highlight, because if we want systematic change, the district and the school leaders must be brought in as partners and ongoing collaborators. The challenge is often this means that as an organization, you might have to pivot your plans to align. If there's an AP strategy at the school, can you align FAFSA with the AP strategy? How can you build on what is already happening within the schools? Second piece, around creating a college team. Often maybe your experience was this at your own high school many years ago, but that there's one person who's the college person. It might be a counselor, it might be a teacher, but that there's one person who is carrying that burden. Here's the challenge, y'all. 4 of 8 school counselors that we were working with that over the pilot left during the pilot or switched schools. 5 of 8 principals left. And so if we don't have a whole team approach, then you're really going to run into a challenge having that work be consistent and ongoing. Building a strong theory of change. So WEF had a great theory of change. They had a strong plan, but as the pilot continued to change and year to year, new data was collected, new strategies were tried, which then meant at the end, we weren't able to fully evaluate the programmatic efforts and those individual pieces to say, what was it that really was moving the needle? And then the other big piece is that customized work within each region or within the school. And I'm going to take just 2 more minutes to show you what that looks like to be having those individualized conversations and why it's so important. So we took, I'll first just say, if you don't know what National Student Clearinghouse data is and you see this kind of dashboard and you think, I want one of something like that, follow up with me after, but check out National Student Clearinghouse. That is where most school districts get their college enrollment data if it's not available from your state from another source. So just know that's available. And so with each high school, we created an individualized dashboard. And I'm going to zoom in so that, because if you're like me and you're wearing glasses and you might need a little more detail. This is what we created these for each high school. And each high school actually looked a little bit different because we were seeing different things in the data. And at first you might think, of course, this is all data that a principal of course has. Every single principal we met with said, I've never seen this data. And I've never seen it pulled together like this, where you see all of a sudden you're looking and you say, oh, our average ACT score over the past 8 years has gone down by a point. But if you're telling that story apart from ACT participation, and you see that now you do full school ACT testing, you realize that there's a group of untested students who are now getting tested and that needs to be accounted for as you're looking, because likely that there has been great growth over time. We're just testing more students now. You also look at it and all of a sudden you see over the past 6 years with FAFSA completion, the dramatic increases that have happened. And you can celebrate that. You can celebrate, gosh, we're at 82%. Maybe we had a goal of 90%, but again, you're a new principal and you don't know what happened 5 years ago. And you can see the growth that the team has been building. We also pull for them all of their popular colleges. So just asking that question, what are the most common colleges your kids are enrolling in? They don't have this data in front of them on a daily basis. And so seeing this allowed us to have these conversations about university choice, graduation rates, what are the colleges they're choosing? And then on the right, then you're going to see all of the college data. So 2 and 4 year are the green and the blue breakdown for first year enrollment, for persistence. So they continue to year 2 and then completion. And I call out the need here for that regional approach because this data is so different from city to city that we went to, that there were there's one community where the community college was outpacing everyone else, their local community college, in completion rates, persistence rates, which led to a follow-up meeting with that community college and the high school to say, how can we better partner with you? Because 85% of our students with over a 3.5 GPA are graduating when they enroll at your school. And that is outpacing all national data, that's outpacing everything we're seeing. And then we would also see something where there's a 4-year college where, gosh, we know we could be partnering better because there's so much we can do to improve the completion rate. And so we don't want to make assumptions. And there was another data slide where I drilled down even more, but with the big group like this, we're not going to do it. But if this kind of stuff gets you excited, I want you to think about how you can apply it within your own communities. This is not, this data is so powerful in the hands of our leaders. And when we then get the additional local context layered in on top of it, so they can tell us what was happening in the community, what things were changing, it'll allow you to create a community-specific plan that'll both increase access and opportunity and create a timeline that works with the district, that accounts for both having the urgency of the students and knowing that we want to move the needle really quickly, while also recognizing that when we set a timeline that allows for leadership and schools to move with us, that we're going to be able to see far more lasting change. So if you, I'll close it there. And if you want to join me for continuing this conversation, we're going to be talking about NSC data, creating those community-specific strategies and goals. And then I believe the decks are all going to be sent out. That this is the contact information of all of the authors. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Eleanor.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Eleanor Anderson, and I'm here with first author Heather McCamley to talk about our work to develop a framework for funding long-lasting equitable change. So this work for us is really motivated by a puzzle. On the one hand, we know that grant makers are increasingly focused on impact and have a range of flexible strategies at their disposal, which we've heard some really beautiful examples of what that can look like today. And on the other hand, we also see really mixed success in achieving transformative change. So to create this framework, we drew together research literature on philanthropy and on organizational and systemic change. And so we're going to just touch on three primary highlights of the paper, ways to shift from spinning our wheels towards really moving that needle. And if these spark your interest, we encourage you to read the paper or reach out to us to talk more about these ideas. So this project started with a review of the empirical research literature, documenting the different strategies used by philanthropic actors to advocate for systemic educational changes. So these strategies included focusing attention on key ideas, engineering and testing new interventions, brokering between policymakers and best practices, and building capacity and coalition for long-term goals. And when those primary change strategies come together in the right combination, we see what we call a remaking of the field. And by remaking, we mean that the political and practical pressures in an area are fundamentally realigned so that we see lasting and meaningful social policy change. When these strategies aren't combined in a successful way, we end up with improvements that are only temporary and may fade when the grant period ends. So the first point that we want to bring forward is the incredible power and potential that comes from accessing all of these different ways of engaging if we can put them together in the right ways. So if we're starting from, we have some kind of problematic outcome, and we know there's this range of strategies available, the question then is, how can we identify and invest in the right mix of strategies to have that remaking or lasting impact on a particular policy domain? Now, there's not a lot of specific causal evidence in the research literature about exactly what works in this way. So here we're drawing on robust literatures in organizational persistence and change to give us some kind of traction on this. And this is the second key point that we really want to bring forward in this piece. The importance of attending to self-sustaining structures. So what we mean by that, these are things like beliefs and norms, power structures, incentives, systems, and routines, really deeply embedded aspect of a setting that tend to persist and actually sustain themselves, kind of for better or for worse. So if we think about the relationship between these entities going from right to left, this is essentially a theory of change. It's the way these strategies are going to remake a domain in the long term is by altering the self-sustaining structures that are reproducing the problematic outcomes. If we think about these relationships from left to right, this becomes a framework for analysis. And so this is something we propose may be useful either at the beginning of a project when we're trying to think through, well, what kind of strategies might we want to employ, or maybe midway through if we're not seeing the kind of results that we hope for, to kind of assess what's going on and where might we want to make some kind of a shift. So based on this organizational research, we think that focusing on these self-sustaining structures is the way to go. However, we also know that if we want lasting change to be equitable, to address the ways that some students who may be older, maybe Black or brown, women, non-binary, disabled, or minoritized in any other way, to influence the way those students are affected differently and disproportionately, this is not enough. And this is the third key point that we want to bring forward. The self-sustaining structures that are reproducing a particular target problem are rarely the same as the ones that are producing the inequalities. And so without attention to both, our solutions actually end up reinscribing those inequities. So to give an example that's, I think, very kind of current for a lot of us right now, we know that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting communities of color. We know that vaccines will help address the impact of COVID. And we're thinking a lot about these vaccine distributions. So if we focus on just increasing the speed of vaccinations, that is going to bring down our infection rate overall. But it's not going to address the equity issue unless we look at specifically at the structures that are causing that inequity. Like, for example, the disproportionate distribution of medical treatment sites that are more often in white and affluent neighborhoods. So to get at the inequitable outcomes, we would need to not only ramp up the vaccinations overall, but also be investing in new sites that are readily accessible for low-income folks and people of color. Right, so in a similar way, when we're thinking about funding strategies, we say that in order to develop a remaking strategy for long-lasting and inequitable change, we need to separate these out and make sure we're attending to issues of equity at each point in our analysis and developing our theory of change.
So to illustrate how our framework can be applied to philanthropic strategy, we offer in this paper a set of examples analyzing key funded movements in post-secondary education. And I'm going to walk through one of these very quickly today, what we refer to as the community college data capacity movement. So here, think about the work of Achieving the Dream, Complete College America, the CCA framework, the Office of Community College Research and Leadership's Pathway to Results project, and other initiatives that emphasize advancing capacity at community college, at the community college level for what is often called data-driven decision-making as a college completion and an equity solution. So this movement was strongly supported in its origins back in the mid-2000s by the philanthropic community. And given its community college focus, work in this area was often situated as critical to minoritized students, as community colleges are the greatest provider of post-secondary education to poor Black and brown students. And this is a case that is ongoing and evolving as you hear discussion about data-driven decision-making even here today. So what we're highlighting is actually what we know from the literature and from practitioners involved in these initiatives about the wins in terms of creating systemic change around data use that has lasted, as well as areas we can learn from as we think about how to design campaigns for equity. So just walking through this project of the community college data capacity movement a bit. It has been funded by many different philanthropic foundations, both together and independently over the last decade plus. The emphasis on data capacity grew out of the larger college completion movement in the mid-2000s, which was also at the peak of the Six Sigma approach to management. The argument in the field was simple. We can only target our strategies and assess our results if we have the right data. This data capacity project fit into a constellation of initiatives by emphasizing the need to address the limited capacity at community colleges as a traditionally under-resourced college type to collect, analyze, and use data for institutional improvement. So if we review both the literature and contemporary press releases, this work was frequently framed in terms of its equity impacts, given the disproportionate impact community colleges have on the trajectories of minoritized students. And we argue in this paper that this movement has been pretty successful at creating change that lasts, having built a number of long-term professional networks, incentives, and sources of prestige via Complete College America, Achieving the Dream, the Aspen Prize, and many others, as well as nearly ubiquitous rhetoric among funders and policymakers about the necessity of data-drivenness. This move toward data-driven decision-making in the community college is at this point self-sustaining in the domain, at least at the colleges that it has reached thus far. And by that we mean all philanthropic investment in building capacity could stop tomorrow, and the use or the reproduction of this outcome in the field would likely persist. So as such, we argue that an aligned theory of change has fundamentally remade the self-sustaining structures in the field to address the problematic outcome. However, many evaluations, both internal and external, of this work suggest that the hoped for impacts on minoritized student outcomes were not necessarily aligned with this theory of change. So the notion that if data are used to expose the equity gaps, that the resulting strategies will thus reduce those gaps every time, did not always pan out, despite the movement's more generalized success. And indeed, there are robust literatures in education research and social psychology that warn us that this type of data exposure, if not treated in the right way, can inadvertently reify biased beliefs and justifications for minoritized student failure rather than challenge educational practice. So we have more recently then seen organizations really invested in being data-driven and involved in this movement pivot as their initial stages improved college completion, but maybe not the equity gaps, to really renew their strategizing, having acknowledged that the core theory of action addresses a problem, but maybe not the equity problem every time. So even with data in hand, practitioners, as they are today, are not always equipped to shift practices and structures that routinely disadvantage students in the community college context. And that this type of practitioner-led transformation takes a different set of tools and anti-racist interventions along with the data. This observation provides a generative challenge as we move into future efforts to shift educational inequities and offer tools, as we outline in this paper, for generating theories of change that center anti-racist change from the start. So we hope that you have or will have a moment to check out the full paper, which we see as a tool from which funders can move from change strategies that might sometimes feel more like spinning our wheels than they do moving forward, to designing change strategies that move the needle by weaving together multiple strategies in ways that remake policy and practice in post-secondary education, targeting strategies that push on self-sustaining structures that create and recreate the status quo over time, and most importantly, strategies that foreground the need not just to increase the efficiency of existing systems, as we mentioned in our COVID-19 vaccine example, but that dismantle specific structures that embed inequity and oppression. And with that, if you have questions, please contact us or join our breakout room if we have time.
That was incredible, Eleanor, Heather. Thank you for that. I want to transition us to the breakout rooms. Jesse, if you wouldn't mind just popping those into the chat or incorporating them on the screen. In breakout room number 1, we'll have Shelley and Jillian's paper, and they'll be happy to discuss and answer any questions about it. And number 2, Ann Hendrick and Tate Kellogg's Get to College Mississippi feature. Number 3, Kimberly Hanover's Get to College and kind of Unlocked feature. And then finally, you can hear more from Heather and Eleanor in breakout room number 4. We'll spend about 10 minutes there and then return to the larger group. So please, if you haven't already done so, select the breakout room in which you want to be. And Jesse, feel free to usher everyone in there. Feels like folks are starting to file into the larger room. I think what I'm going to do now is just allow for anyone who may have a remaining question to the group that they did not get to ask in their breakouts to just jump in. I know we're drawing close to the time. So if you had one question that you weren't able to get in during your discussion that could be applied to the group, please feel free to share. I was just struck by Eleanor and Heather's paper, and I'm just wondering if I could just start here and then maybe jump in, allow others to jump in. What societal challenges should philanthropy be addressing when we seek to increase post-secondary attainment? In other words, increasing post-secondary attainment to what ends? And again, I'll just jump in pointing to Eleanor and Heather, but if anyone else has a short answer or anything they need to say before we break out, please feel free to join after them.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of takes on this, but at this particular moment, after everything we've seen in 2020 and early 2021, I really think this is a moment to say our work in post-secondary education needs to focus on dismantling white supremacy and other forms of discrimination that really run through the veins of post-secondary policy and systems. So while we focused on equity gaps for a long time across communities, and that's been so important and we've made a lot of gains, the focus of our efforts has been on changing kind of the behavior behaviors and on-ramps for communities of color into and through higher ed. And that's so critical because the long-term goal is seeing pipelines of communities of color into our nation's leadership politically, professionally, and so on. And that's one mode of diminishing kind of this white supremacy we're dealing with right now. But we also have a lot of work and deeper questions we can ask about how we can look at our current policies, pedagogies, and funding patterns, and our underlying belief about what makes a good education. And I think that's just something in our work that we're really surfacing as a critical place to work in tandem with the college completion strategy that would have a lot of spillover into the college completion we do long term, and a focal point for our change work, rather than to remediate or act on communities of color, but to lift them up and to intervene on these forms of inequity as we see them today.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, that's our time. Please join me by sharing a round of applause with our authors via Zoom or by hand. Thank you to GFE for hosting us. Thank you to the staff, editors, and reviewers of the Foundation Review for shepherding us through such a solid set of articles that help us take stock and interpret philanthropy's efforts to increase post-secondary education attainment and chart future directions for research, strategy, and practice. And finally, to the audience, thanks for bearing with us and participating. Please make sure to check out the Foundation Review's website. I think we have it here in the chat, scholarworks.gvsu.edu/TFR. Remember, it's volume 12, issue 3. Celine, feel free to jump in here. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, so thank you, Ed. I think this was a fantastic session. Thank you to all the presenters, especially Heather. Love how you ended. I think that was a really important ending about the systemic nature of the change that we seek. And thank you to all of the participants, because sometimes the breakout groups don't work so well, and it seems like they went really well today. So that's super exciting and a good measure of engagement. And so, thank you all and have a great day. A couple of things coming up. We have more sessions March 1st through 4th, and are running a Grantmakers Institute with the Harvard Graduate School of Education starting in April. So take a look at those things and hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.